Good day mga kapwa ko law student, no? Today we are going to discuss about basic taxation law, which is part 6 already of our taxation series. So it's about judicial review, taxpayer suit, and all other else until uh, going towards pyramiding. Okay? So again, just a disclaimer, no? This video is made by the uploader as his way of studying the subject. I am not yet a lawyer nor an expert in this field, but I am just expressing my ideas and how I understood the subject of basic taxation. So, when we say about judicial review and the taxpayer suit, it is defined in the case of Garcia versus Executive Secretary, wherein the court ruled that the power of judicial has been discussed as the power of the courts to test the validity of executive and legislative acts for their conformity with the Constitution. So, through such power, the judiciary enforces and upholds the supremacy of the Constitution. Now, there are certain conditions, no, to be met for judicial review. And for a court to exercise this power, certain requirements must first be met. Namely, number one, an actual case or controversy calling for the exercise of judicial power. Number two, the person challenging the act must have standing to challenge for what we call as locus standi. He must have a personal and substantial interest in the case such that he has sustained or will sustain direct injury as a result of its enforcement. Number three, the question of constitutionality must be raised at the earliest possible opportunity. And lastly, the issue of constitutionality must be the very least muta of the case. In a taxpayer suit, this involves the second requirement of locus standi or legal standing. Now, when we say locus standi or legal standing, well, it is defined also uh, by the Supreme Court as that legal standing or locus standi has been defined as a personal and substantial interest in the case such that the party, number one, has sustained or will sustain direct injury as a result of challenged act. Interest means a material interest in issue that is affected by the question act or instrument as distinguished from a mere incidental interest in the question involved as in the case of Bilarde versus SJS. In Funa versus Villar in 2012, the rule of the court on locus standi is after all a mere procedural technicality in relation to which the court in a catena of cases involving a subject of transcendental import has waived or relaxed, thus allowing non-traditional plaintiffs such as concerned citizens, taxpayers, voters, or legislators to sue in the public interest, albeit that they not have been personally injured by the operation of a law or any other governmental act. In David, the court laid out that the bare minimum norm before the so-called non-traditional suitors may be extended standing to sue. Thusly, number one, for taxpayers, he must be there must be a claim of illegal disbursement of public funds or that the tax measure is unconstitutional. Number two, for voters, there must be a showing of obvious interest in the validity of the election law in question. Number three, for concerned citizens, there must be a showing that the issues raised are of transcendental importance, which must be settled early. And also, lastly, for legislators for legislators, there must be a claim that the official action complained of infringes their prerogatives as legislators. So, in a taxpayer suit presupposes a claim of illegal disbursement of public funds or that the tax measure is unconstitutional. In Bilardi versus SJS, parties suing as taxpayers must specifically prove that they have sufficient interest in preventing the illegal expenditure of money raised by taxation. A taxpayer's action may be properly brought only when there is an exercise by Congress of its taxing or spending power. A petitioner filing as a taxpayer to question the validity of an act, one must have a sufficient interest in preventing the illegal expenditure of money raised by taxation, and number two, he or she will have sustained or will sustain a direct injury in the enforcement of the law. In the case of Anti-Graft League versus San Juan, GR number 97797, the Supreme Court ruled, so here, the facts of this case that the Anti-Graft League of the Philippines claims that the instant petition for certiorari is a taxpayer suit which it filed because Provincial Board of Rizal allegedly illegally disbursed public funds in transaction involving 4 parcels of land in Ugong Norte, Pasig. In 1975, the board acquired 4 parcels of land in Pasig pursuant to PD 674 to establish technological colleges of Rizal. However, the construction never materialized because of the decimation of the resources of the province due to the creation of Metro Manila Commission in 1976. So, the property being idle, the board issued resolution authorizing governor to sell the same and was sold to Valley View Realty for 134 million pesos. After learning such sale, a rescission case was filed by the original vendor, Ortigas, of the parcels of land as being violative of the original purpose of site for the college. Additionally, Valley View has also filed for rescission but however entered into a compromise agreement with the province later. As between Ortigas and the province, a compromise agreement was also entered into where the province agreed to return and recovery the 4 parcels of land to Ortigas worth 432 million, which was just higher than the market values. So this was approved by the judge. Thus, the petitioners filed the instance case of certiorari seeking to nullify the compromise agreement between Ortigas and the province. So the issue in this case is that is the present action of a taxpayer suit. Does petitioner possess a legal standing to question the transaction entered into by the Provincial Board of Rizal and Ortigas? The answer is none. The Supreme Court ruled that to constitute a taxpayer suit, 2 requisites must be met. Namely, 1, that public funds are disbursed by a political subdivision or instrumentality, and in doing so, a law is violated or some irregularity is committed. And number 2, that the petitioner is directly affected by the alleged Ultra Vires Act. This is not a constitutional issue according to the Supreme Court because a closer examination of the facts of this case would readily demonstrate that petitioner's standing should not even be made an issue here, since standing is a concept in constitutional law, and here, no constitutional question is actually involved. The first requisite is absent. In the case at bar, disbursement of public funds was only made in 1975 when the province bought the lands from Ortigas at 110 per square meter, in line with the objectives of PD 674. Petitioner never referred to such purchase as an illegal disbursement of public funds, but focused on the alleged fraudulent reconveyance of said property to Ortigas because the price paid was lower than the prevailing market value of neighboring lots. The first requirement, therefore, which would make this petition a taxpayer suit, is absent. The second requirement also is absent. Undeniably, as a taxpayer, petitioner would somehow be adversely affected by an illegal use of public money when, however, no such unlawful spending has been shown. As in the case at bar, petitioner, even as a taxpayer, cannot question the transaction validly executed by and between the province and Ortigas. for the simple reason that it is not privy to said contract. Petitioner has absolutely no cause of action and consequently no locus standi in the instant case. Now, let's go to escape from taxation. Escape from taxation refers to the means employed by a taxpayer, whether legal or illegal, so as not to pay or absorb the burden of a tax that is imposed. According to some law professors, these are forms of escape which are remedies that the taxpayer may also resort to for purposes of reducing the burden. Now, escape from taxation, it is the taxpayer's employment of any means, regardless of its legality, to reduce or to altogether avoid the payment of taxes. While tax exemption, these are the laws promulgated by the Congress wherein the taxpayer will not suffer the burden of taxation. Now, in shifting of the tax burden, it means the transferring the economic burden from the one who pays the tax to another. So the tax where shifting is allowed are indirect taxes. That is the only tax when shifting is allowed. Unlike indirect taxes, direct taxes cannot be shifted because the person liable to the tax is the one who also shoulders the burden, like income tax. Income tax is based on the income, wages, or salaries, and this cannot be transferred to another. Donor's tax is also a form of a direct tax. Now, in shifting the burden in indirect taxes, the first one liable on the statutory taxpayer is the person liable under the law. He is allowed to shift or pass the burden of the tax to another person, like the transaction of buyer and seller. For example, the buyer purchases an item from the seller. The price of the item already includes the tax, yet the tax liability is on the store, but the store is allowed to add the tax as part of the purchase price because of the shifting. Now, can Congress enact a law that all indirect tax could not be shifted? That's a question. The answer is no, because Congress legislate because it is inherent from the nature of indirect tax to be shifted. Now, there are ways of shifting. There are three types or forms of shifting. Number one is forward shifting, the transfer of tax from factors of production to factors of distribution, which is from buyer to seller. Then we have also the backward shifting, when the seller absorbs the tax. And number three, onward shifting, occurs when the tax is shifted two or more times, either forward or backward, shifting in a chain. There are several shifts until it ends to the consumer. So, capitalization is a form of backward shifting in a sense that this form of escape is not applicable to all types of transactions. It applies or is peculiar only like whereby future taxes on the property sold are capitalized at the time of the purchase and deducting in the lump sum from the selling price. Example here is that X is engaged in real estate business, decides to buy a real property with a budget of 20 million pesos. A property was for sale for 20 million. After negotiations with the seller, the amount agreed upon is 16 million. The 4 million in savings would be to address the future taxes on the property. Instead of normally paying them, the 4 million will be capitalized for a period to pay the taxes in that real property. It benefits one for the reasons that the one will not look for another money to pay future taxes. Now let's go to transformation, where the producer on whom the tax imposed, feeling the loss of his market if he adds a tax to the price, pays now the tax and pays additional expense by improving his methods of production, turning out units at a less cost. Hence, the tax is transferred to a gain through the medium of production. The seller then absorbs the impact of the tax but this burden is shouldered by improving the methods of production. Mainly, this is affected through the process of production. Now, there are ways of shifting taxation. Number one, include tax on the selling price where the tax is not billed separately but included in the selling price. Number two, method of listing the price separately and defining taxable gross receipts as the amount received less the amount of tax added. The tax is then billed separately. Note that it is still the seller who is subject to the tax and not the buyer. The additional amount paid by the buyer is not payment for the tax but payment for the purchase of goods. Thus, in the case of Philippine Acetylene versus CIR, even if the sales invoice would be named to NEA as tax exempt, government corporation, the sale is still taxable because the buyer's exemption does not flow to the seller as it is still the seller who is the subject of the tax and not the buyer. So the total amount paid by the National Electrification Administration is not payment for the tax but payment for the purchase of the electric cables. Now, what are the taxes that can be shifted? Number one, franchise tax. Number two, contractor's tax. Number three, value-added tax. Number four, documentary stamp tax. Number five, excise tax. And number six, we have the percentage tax. Now, what are the impact from incidence of taxation? So, impact of taxation refers to the liability of the payment of the tax. Incidence of taxation refers to the burden of paying the tax. The rule is that only indirect taxes can be subject of shifting and not direct taxes, because in indirect taxes is where the impact and incidence of taxation can be split as to direct taxes. The impact and incidence always fall upon one person only. Now, in indirect taxation, the amount of tax paid may be shifted or passed on by the seller to the buyer. What is transferred in such instance is not the liability of or impact of the tax, but the tax burden, or what we call as the incidence of taxation. For example, a seller who is directly and legally liable for payment of an indirect tax, the VAT on goods or services, is not necessarily the person who ultimately bears the burden of the same tax. It is usually the final purchaser or consumer of such goods or services who, although not directly and legally liable for the payment thereof, ultimately bears the burden of the tax in the case of Context Corporation versus CIR. What is then shifted to the intermediate buyer and ultimately to the final purchaser is the burden or incidence of taxation. Now, let's go to the case of Silkair versus CIR. The facts of this case is that Silkair filed with BIR a written application for the refund of 4.5 million excise taxes it claimed to have paid on its purchases of jet fuel from Petron. It was not acted upon, thus it went to the Court of Tax Appeal. CIR answered that the excise tax on petroleum products is the direct liability of manufacturer or producer, and when added to the cost of the goods sold to the buyer, it is no longer a tax but part of the price which buyer has to pay. Now, Silkair argues that it is exempt from indirect taxes because the air transport agreement between the Republic of the Philippines and Singapore grants tax exemption, and also invoking Maceda vs. Macaraig Jr., which upheld the claim for tax credit or refund of NPC on the ground that it was exempt even from payment of indirect taxes. Now, the issue here is that would the claim of refund prosper? The answer is no. The property party to seek refund of an indirect tax is the statutory taxpayer. The statutory taxpayer is the person on whom the tax is imposed by law and who paid the same, even if he shifts the burden thereof to another. Thus it is patron, not self-heir, who is the statutory taxpayer entitled to claim for refund. NPC exemption for both direct and indirect taxes is expressly provided in its charter. In CIR versus PLDT, it clarified that the NPC exemption for all taxes of NPC is clear in its charter. Unlike in the air transport agreement, there is no clear showing for such strictissimi juris applies to tax exemption claims. Thus, self-heir cannot use such defense. So what is tax avoidance? Tax avoidance, it is the exploitation of or exploitation by the taxpayer of legally permissible alternative rates or methods of assessing taxable property or income in order to reduce or entirely avoid tax liability, like when one avails of all deductions allowed by law or refraining from engaging activities subject to tax. In the case of CIR versus TODA, tax avoidance is the tax-saving device within that means sanctioned by law. This method should be used by the taxpayer in good faith and at arm's length. Tax avoidance is also described as using the legal loopholes to lessen tax liability. Tax avoidance is not forbidden in our jurisdiction. In Heng Tong versus CIR, an attempt to minimize one's tax does not necessarily constitute fraud. It is a settled principle that a taxpayer may diminish his liability by any means which the law permits. In Gregory versus Helvering, 29 U.S. 465, to avoid is legal but to evade is illegal. The legal right of a taxpayer to decrease the amount of what otherwise would be his taxes altogether, avoid them by means which the law permits, cannot be doubted. Now, what is the difference between tax evasion from tax avoidance? Now, tax evasion, the evasion should be applied to the escape from taxation accomplished by breaking the letter of the tax law, like the deliberate omission to report taxable item, while in tax avoidance, it covers escape accomplished by legal procedures or means which may be contrary to the intent of the sponsor of the tax law, but nevertheless do not violate the letter of the law. In tax evasion, tax evader breaks the law, while in tax avoidance, tax avoider sidesteps it. In tax evasion is the use of unlawful or illegal means to evade the payment of tax. Tax evasion is punishable, while in tax avoidance, it is the lawful or legally permissible methods to reduce tax liability like tax minimization, example, sale, donation, or estate planning. In tax evasion, almost always results in absence of tax payments, while in tax avoidance, it is minimization of taxes. In tax evasion, warrants the imposition of civil, administrative, and criminal penalties, while in tax avoidance, it does not result to any penalties. Now, let's go to the 1972 bar question. A, after studying his tax problems, decided to withdraw his bank deposits and to buy non-taxable or tax-exempt securities. Does these acts constitute tax evasion which is penalized? The answer is no. Tax evasion is the deliberate intention using illegal means to deprive the government of its right to collect taxes. There is not a law that prohibits the withdrawal of bank deposits to use the process to buy non-taxable or tax-exempt securities. What was resorted to was a tax avoidance. Note, another way of tax avoidance is estate planning, which involves gradual donation of amounts that are exempt from the taxation, in a sense that when the person dies, there is no more taxable properties left and thus estate tax will not be paid. In addition, when one donates his assets to an educational institution, non-stock or a non-profit, and uses such assets actually, directly, and exclusively, tax is also avoided. Now let's go to tax evasion. So, tax evasion, it is a scheme used outside of lawful means and when availed of usually subjects the taxpayer to further additional civil or criminal liabilities. Well, tax evasion connotes fraud in the use of pretenses and forbidden devices to lessen or defeat taxes. So when consummated, the crime of tax evasion is complete when the taxpayer has then knowingly and willfully filed a fraudulent return with intent to evade and defeat the tax. In the case of CAR versus Gonzalez in 2010. Now, there is fraud in tax evasion. According to Aban, tax evasion may be exemplified by means of tax fraud or the use of deceit in order to evade taxes. Fraud, however, is a serious charge and to be sustained, it must then be supported by clear and convincing evidence. Fraud, being a question of fact, must be alleged and proved. In determining whether fraud exists, substance and not form should control, like in the Republic versus Gonzalez, when a taxpayer fails to declare for taxation his true and actual income derived from furniture business for 2 consecutive years is an indication of fraudulent intent to cheat government taxes. Now, factors integrated in tax evasion. Number one, the ends to be achieved, such as the payment of less than that known by the taxpayer to be legally due, or the non-payment of tax when it is shown that tax is due. Number two, an accompanying state of mind which is described as being evil or in bad faith, willful or deliberate and not accidental. And lastly, course of action or failure of action which is unlawful, as in the case of CAR versus Estate of Toda Jr. in 2004. Now, let's look at the facts of this case. A notice of assessment was sent to Civiles Insurance Corporation for deficiency income tax of 79 million arising from alleged simulated sale of 16-story commercial building known as Civiles Building in Makati. Toda president and owner allegedly sold the property for 100 million to Altunaga, who sold the same to Royal Match for 200 million. For the sale of the property to Royal Match, Altunaga paid capital gains tax in the amount of 10 million. The two deeds were both notarized and on the same day by the same notary public. Now, the issue of this case is that is this case of tax evasion or tax avoidance? So, yun yung tanong dito sa case na ito. The decision of the Supreme Court says that tax avoidance and tax evasion are the two most common ways used by taxpayers in escaping from taxation. Tax avoidance is the tax-saving device within the means sanctioned by law. This method should be used by the taxpayer in good faith and at arm's length, while tax evasion, on the other hand, is a scheme used outside of those lawful means and when availed of, it usually subjects the taxpayer further or additional civil or criminal liabilities. The three factors of tax evasion are present. Number one, tax evasion connotes the integration of three factors. Number one, the end to be achieved, example, the payment of less than that known by the taxpayer to be legally due, or the non-payment of tax when it is shown that a tax is due. Number two, an accompanying state of mind which is described as being evil, in bad faith, willful, or deliberate and not accidental. And number three, a course of action or failure of action which is unlawful. All these factors are present in the instant case. It is significant to note that as early as May 4, 1989, prior to the purported sale of the Civiles property by CIC to Altunaga on 30 August 1989, CIC received 40 million from RMI and not from Altunaga. The 40 million was debited by RMI and reflected in its trial balance as other investment slash Adash Civiles Building. Also of 31 July 1989, Another 40 million was debited and reflected in RMI's trial balance as another investment dash Cibeles building. This would show that the real buyer of the properties was RMI and not the intermediary Altonaga. Altonaga is a mere conduit as admitted by the estate when it stated that the sale to Altonaga was a part of tax planning scheme of CIC. Tax planning was defined as their way to reduce, if not eliminate altogether, a tax for wanting to reduce from 35% corporate tax to 5% tax. Now, this scheme is tainted with fraud. It is obvious that the objective of the sale to Altonaga was to reduce the amount of tax to be paid, especially that the transfer from him to RMI would then subject the income tax to only 5% individual capital gains tax and not the 35% corporate income tax. Altonaga's sole purpose of acquiring and transferring title of the subject properties on the same day was to create a tax shelter. Altonaga never controlled the property and did not enjoy the normal benefits and burdens of ownership. The sale to him was merely a tax ploy, a sham, and without business purpose and economic substance. Doubtless, the execution of the two sales was calculated to mislead the BRR with the end in viewing the reducing the consequent income tax liability. In a nutshell, the intermediary transaction example, the estate of Altonaga, which has prompted more on the mitigation of tax liabilities than for legitimate business purposes, constitutes one of tax evasion. Now, the incidence of taxation depends on substance. Generally, a sale or exchange of assets will have an income tax incidence only when it is consummated. The incidence of taxation depends upon the substance of the transaction. The tax consequences arising from gains from a sale of property to transfer legal title, rather, the transaction must be viewed as a whole, and each step from the commencement of negotiations to the consummation of the sale is relevant. A sale by one person cannot be transformed for tax purposes into a sale by another by using the latter as a conduit through which to pass title. To permit the true nature of the transaction to be disguised by mere formalisms which exist solely to alter the when you try to do that by altering when you try to alter the tax liabilities would seriously impair the effective administration of the tax policies of Congress. To allow taxpayer to deny liability on the ground that the sale was made through another and distinct entity when it is proved to be that the latter was merely a conduit is to sanction a circumvention of our tax laws. Hence, the sale to Altonaga should be disregarded as the for income tax purposes. So the two sales should be disregarded for income tax purposes. And the two sale transactions should be treated as a single direct sale by CIC to RMI. Now let's go to tax exemption. Tax exemption, or we call it exemption from taxation, is the act of the state in divesting itself of its prerogative to collect taxes upon certain subjects and objects of taxation. The essence of tax exemption is the immunity or freedom from a charge or burden to which others are subjected. It is a waiver of the government's right to collect. It is understood as freedom from the imposition and payment of particular tax. Now, what are the nature of exemptions? Now, it is in the nature of a waiver by the state of an act of sovereignty, hence to be strictly construed against the taxpayer. It is to be granted only upon the clearest intention and should not exist by mere implication, otherwise the very existence of the state would be imperiled for lack of wherewithal to perform its functions. Taxation is the rule and exemption is the exception. Exemptions from taxation are highly disfavored in law, and he who claims an exemption must be able to justify his claim by the clearest grant of organic or statute law. However, the rule on strict interpretation does not apply in cases of exemptions granted in favor of government political subdivisions or instrumentality like public corporations. Now, let's go to the principle of equity, which is not ground. Equity is not a valid ground for granting tax exemption. There must be some basis by law or by some reason of public policy that one is entitled to the exemption because tax exemption is construed strictly against the taxpayer. Thus, a taxpayer invoking the exemption should show the law of which he is invoking allows him or grants him the coverage of exemption. Without such basis, such person will be taxable. Now, what are the kinds of exemption? As to manner of creation, we have express. There is express exemption where the law is specific in the identification of the subjects and objects that are not to be taxed. There is a direct grant by constitution or by law. Another one is implied. Implied exemption results from the failure to include the subject or objects as among those to be taxed, meaning if there are groups of taxpayers that are taxable, if one is not found therein, then by implication, one is not covered. And lastly, we have contractual. The exemption results from the rendition of the subject or objects of a service in exchange for the exemption. Now, as to the object of exemption, we have also here the personal. Personal is directed in favor of a certain persons or individuals taxpayers. And number two, impersonal, which is directed to certain class. As to scope, number one, total exemption, like non-stock, non-profit education exemptions. However, exemption only insofar as to direct taxes. And we have also exempted from both direct and indirect taxes, the National Power Corporation granted through presidential decree. This is the case of the Makaraig. Now, we have also here the partial exemption, meaning only partial is exempted. Now, what are the rationale grounds for exemption? Rationale for tax exemption, number one, sumptuary or regulatory to promote general welfare and to protect the health, safety, or morals of the inhabitants. Number two, to implement police power goals. And number three, compensatory purpose to implement social justice provisions of the Constitution. Tax exemptions may be granted to lower the price of certain commodities and services. Employment opportunities may also be created as a result of tax exemptions, which will encourage the establishment of business enterprises. Now, there is a revocation of tax exemption. A tax exemption may be revoked because it is an act of liberality which could be taken back by the government. Since taxation is the rule and exemption therefrom is the exception, the exemption may thus be withdrawn at the pleasure of the taxing authority. There is no vested right in a tax exemption, more so when the latest expression of legislative intent renders its continuance doubtful. Congress can enact a law withdrawing a tax exemption just as efficaciously as it may grant the same. Now, let's go to the Film Development Council versus Colon Heritage. It is a basic precept that the inherent legislative powers of Congress, broad as they may be, are limited and confined within the four walls of the Constitution. Accordingly, whenever the legislature exercises its power to enact, amend, and repeal laws, it should do so without going beyond the parameters wrought by the organic law. In the case at bar, though the application and enforcement of Section 14 of RA 9167, the income from the amusement taxes levied by the government covered by the LGU did not and will under no circumstance accrue to them, not even partially, despite being the taxing authority. Therefore, Congress therefore clearly overstepped its plenary legislative power, the amendment being violative of the fundamental laws guarantee and local autonomy is echoed in Section 130, subparagraph D of the Local Government Code. Now, incentive award, not a tax exemption. Simply put, both the burden and incidence of the amusement tax are borne by the proprietors, lessors, and operators, not by the producers of the graded films. Now, the transfer of the amount of to the film producers is actually a monetary reward given to them for having produced a graded film. The funding for which was taken by the national government from the coffers of the covered LGUs, without a doubt, that is not an exemption from payment of tax. Now let's go to compensation. Compensation or set-off. It is a mode of extinguishing an obligation when two persons in their own right are debtors and creditors of each other, and that the debts are both due and demandable. Tax Taxes cannot be subject of compensation or set-off. For the reason that number one, the lifeblood theory. This is because taxes are the lifeblood of the government which it needs for its operations. Number two, taxes are not contractual obligations. Payment of taxes is not in the nature of contractual obligations between the state and the taxpayer, but grows out of a duty which does not require the personal consent of the taxpayer. Number three, not mutual creditors or debtors of each other. The government and the taxpayer are not mutually creditors and debtors for each other, and a claim for taxes is no such a debt, demand, contract, or judgment as is allowed to be set out. There is no offsetting of taxes against a taxpayer's claims against government. A person cannot refuse to pay a tax on the ground that the government owes him an amount equal to or greater than the tax being collected. The collection of tax cannot await the results of a lawsuit against the government in the case of Francia versus IAC. Now, let's go from the tax from debt. The case of South African Airways versus CIR. Taxes cannot be subject to compensation for the simple reason that the government and the taxpayer are not creditors and debtors of each other. There is a material distinction between a tax and a debt. Debts are due to the government in its corporate capacity, while taxes are due to the government in sovereign capacity. Now, we have consistently ruled that there can be no offsetting of taxes against the claims that the taxpayer may have against the government. A person cannot refuse to pay a tax on the ground that the government owes him an amount equal to or greater than the tax being collected. The collection of a tax cannot await the results of a lawsuit against the government. Also, a taxpayer may not offset taxes due from the claims that he may have against the government. Taxes cannot be subject of compensation because the government and taxpayer are not mutually creditors and debtors of each other. Now, let's go to the case of CIR versus ESO standard. So, this is about the permissible compensation, which is Solucio and Debeti. In case of a tax overpayment, the BIR's obligation to refund or offset arises from the moment the tax was paid. The facts of this case is that ESO overpaid in 1959 income tax of 221,033 pesos. It was accordingly granted a tax credit. However, ESO's payment of its income tax for 1960 was found to be short by 367,994. ESO paid under protest the amount alleged to be due, contending that it should have not been required to pay the interest but only of amount, which was 146,961, representing the deficiency of 367,000, and its earlier overpayment of 221,033, for which it had been granted a tax credit. CIR denied claim for refund but was granted by the Court of Tax Appeal. Now, the issue of this case that should overpayment be considered for a set-off? The ruling is that yes, the government has already in its hands sum of 221,000 representing the excess payment, having been paid and received by mistake, which Commissioner recognized that sum belonged to ESO and government had the obligation to return it to ESO. The obligation of the payee to reimburse an amount paid to him results from the mistake, not from the payee's confession or the mistake of recognition by the obligation to reimburse. In other words, since the amount of 221,033 belonging to ESO was already in the hands of the government as of July 1960, although the latter had no right whatever to the amount and indeed was bound to return it to ESO, it was neither legally nor logically possible for ESO thereafter to be considered a debtor of the government in that amount of 221,033 pesos, and whether other obligation ESO might subsequently incur in favor of the government would have to be reduced by that sum, in respect of which no interest could be charged. Now, let's go to the equitable recoupment. Doctrine of equitable recoupment. The doctrine of equitable recoupment holds that where the refund of a tax illegally or erroneously collected or overpaid by a taxpayer is barred by prescription, a tax presently being assessed against a taxpayer may be recouped or set off against the tax whose refund is now barred by prescription. The doctrine of not applicable in the Philippines because of the lifeblood theory, taxpayers would become lazy in paying taxes because they could either be offset the alleged illegally or erroneously collected or overpaid taxes. The same would also be said to tax collectors relative to their duty to collect taxes because they know that the taxpayer would not pay anyway because of the offset with previous illegally or erroneously collected or overpaid taxes. Now, another one is the concept of tax amnesty. Tax amnesty is a general pardon or intentional overlooking by the state of its authority to impose penalties on persons otherwise guilty of evasion or violation of a revenue or tax law. It partakes of an absolute forgiveness of or waiver by the government of its right to collect what is due and to give tax evaders who wish to relent a chance to start with a clean slate. The nature of tax amnesty is that it partakes of an absolute forgiveness or waiver of the government of its rights to collect otherwise would be due it and in this sense prejudicial thereto. Now, only Congress can grant tax amnesty. Under the Philippine Constitution, there could be no tax amnesty granted by the President of the Philippines because the same is in the nature of a tax exemption, which could be granted only by a majority of all the members of Congress. Purpose of the tax amnesty is that it is to give back the tax evaders who wish to relent and are willing to reform a chance to do so and thereby start with a clean slate on taxes. It aims to grant a general reprieve to the evaders who wish to come clean by giving them an opportunity to straighten out their records. It also gives government a chance to collect uncollected tax from tax evaders without having to go through the tedious process of a tax case. To avail a tax amnesty granted by the government and to be immune from suit amidst delinquencies, the taxpayer must have voluntarily disclosed his previously untaxed income and must have paid the corresponding tax on such previously untaxed income. Now, in the case of CIR versus Transfield, a tax amnesty, like tax exemption, is never favored nor presumed in law, and if granted by statute, must be strictly construed against the taxpayer and liberally construed in favor of the taxing authority. Now, in this case, Transfield was given a final assessment notice or FAN by CIR for a total sum of 563 million of tax deficiency, mainly of income tax. In 2008, it availed of benefits of RA 9480, this is the law that grants tax amnesty, by submitting documents to DBP, which is a BIR agent bank, on the same day Transfield paid to BIR via DBP an amnesty tax of 112,500 pesos. However, BIR wrote to Transfield that it is not allowed to avail the benefits of RA 9480. Later, it issued warrant of distraint and or levy with directing seizure of property of Transfixed to the extent of 563 million. The respondent argues in this case that the WDAL was improper as well as the letter written because it alleged that a taxpayer immediately enjoys the immunities granted by RA 9480 as soon as the taxpayer complies with the conditions under the law, and the BIR may not prevent or delay taxpayers from such. Now, the issue of the case that is Transfield entitled to tax amnesty. The answer is yes. Tax amnesty operates as a general pardon of intentional overlooking by the state of its authority to impose penalties on persons otherwise guilty of evasion or violation of a revenue or tax law. It is an absolute forgiveness or waiver by the government of its right to collect what is due it and to give tax evaders who wish to relent a chance to start with a clean slate. A tax amnesty must likewise take an exemption, is never favored nor presumed in law. The grant of a tax amnesty is akin to a tax exemption, thus it must be construed strictly against the taxpayer and liberally in favor of the taxing authority. RA 9480, it grants tax amnesty to qualified taxpayers for revenue taxes for the taxable years 2005 and prior years. It was shown Transfield complied with documents and successfully availed itself of the tax amnesty benefits granted under RA 9480, which include immunity from the appertinent civil, criminal, and administrative penalties under the tax code arising from the failure to pay any and all internal revenues taxes for the year 2005 and prior years. Thus, WDAL should have not been ordered and issued. Now, let's distinguish tax amnesty from tax exemption. Tax amnesty, it is an immunity from all criminal, civil, and administrative liabilities arising from non-payment of taxes. While tax exemption, it is an immunity from civil liability only. It is an immunity or privilege of freedom from a charge or burden to which others are subjected. While tax amnesty applies only to past tax periods, tax exemption is or has prospective application. Now, let's go to the construction and interpretation. Statutory construction. If the law is clear and unambiguous and admits of no other interpretation, there is no need then to apply statutory construction. It is only when there is doubt in the interpretation of the provisions there be necessarily to resort to statutory construction. So meaning, no doubt, no interpretation. Now let's go to tax laws. General rule, in case of doubt, tax laws must always be construed strictly against the state and liberally in favor of the taxpayer. No person or property is subject to taxation unless within the terms or plain import of a taxing state. In case of doubt, tax statutes are construed strictly against the government and deliberately in favor of the taxpayer. Taxes being burdens they are not presumed beyond what has the statute expressly and clearly declares. Exceptions. The rule of strict construction as against government is not applicable where, number one, the language of the tax statute is plain and there is no doubt as to the legislative intent, in such case, the words are given ordinary meaning. Number 2, tax statutes are to receive reasonable construction with a view to carrying out their purpose and intent. They should not be construed as to permit the taxpayer to easily evade payment of tax. And a taxpayer and a tax statute should be construed to avoid possibilities of tax evasion. So other rules to be observed, number 1, interpretations must be according to the letter of the law and must not be extended by mere application. Meaning of the words first resorted to in statutory construction. Law must read as a whole and should be read in its entirety when interpreting it, and every part of the statute must be considered. Number 4, statute must be harmonized with other laws. Number 5, special law prevails over general law. Number 6, inclusio unius est exclusio alterius. Number 7, et justem dineres. And number 8, doubt should be resolved in favor of constitutionality. All of these are found in the case of MCIAA versus Marcos. Now let's go to exemptions and exclusion. As a general rule, exemptions are not favored and are construed strictissimi juris against the taxpayer. Taxation is the rule, exemption is the exception. However, whoever claims exemption must be able to justify his claim of right thereto, and claims for refund partake of the nature of tax exemptions and will not be allowed unless granted in the most explicit and categorical language. Exceptions when the law itself expressly provides for liberal construction, that in case of doubt, it shall be resolved in favor of exemption. Exemption in favor of government agencies, for they are generally exempt from taxes. Exemption refers to religious, charitable, and educational institutions, and express mention or clear legislative intent that the rule on strict construction does not apply. Now, in the case of CIR versus Pilipinas Shell, Section 135 exempts international carriers and does not exempt the oil companies from payment of excise tax and petroleum products sold by them to international carriers. Tax refunds must be denied. Referring to international carriers, the court said that the exemption from tax given under Section 135A is based on international understanding that fuel used for international air services should be exempt from tax. But the earlier amendments in the 1977 Tax Code and the present Section 135 of the 1997 NIRC did not exempt the oil companies from the payment of excise tax on petroleum products manufactured and sold by them to international carriers. Tax rules and regulations. Regulations deserve respect of courts. Rules and regulations interpreting tax code and promulgated by the Secretary of Finance, who has been granted authority to do so, deserve to be given weight and respect by the courts in view of the rule-making authority given to those who formulate and their specific expertise in their respective fields. Revenue regulations partake the nature of law. In general, rules and regulations issued by administrative or executive officers pursuant to the procedure or authority that is conferred by law upon the administrative agency has the force and effect and partake the nature of the statute. Administrative issuance may not override the law. While it may be true that Secretary of Finance, in conjunction with the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, can promulgate rules and regulations for the enforcement of internal revenue laws. However, all such issuances must not override but must remain consistent and in harmony with the law that they seek to uphold or apply, and neither to supplant nor to modify the law, as in the case of Sears SM Prime Holdings. Administrative issuance may not run counter to the law. To be valid, an administrative rule or regulation must conform and not contradict the provisions of the enabling law. An implementing rule or regulation cannot modify, expand, or subject from the law it is intended to implement. Any rule that is not consistent with the statute itself is null and void. Revenue regulations are binding on courts as long as the procedure for its promulgation is followed and is germane to the law and is not contrary to the enabling law and is not ultra vires. It is binding on the courts. Now let's go to provision of tax laws. There's a bar question in 2010 where it says that in criminal cases involving tax offenses punishable under the National Internal Revenue Code, prescription is construed strictly against the government. True or false? It is false because statutes of limitations in criminal cases constitute surrender by the sovereign of its right to prosecute. Hence, they receive a strict construction in favor of the government. This because in criminal cases, statutes of limitations are acts of grace, a surrendering by the sovereign of its rights to prosecute. They receive a strict construction diet in favor of the government, and limitations in such cases will not be presumed in the absence of a clear legislation. Non-retroactivity. Tax laws and rules and regulations operate prospectively. Tax laws, unlike remedial laws, are not to be applied retroactively. Revenue laws are substantive laws and their application must not be equated with remedial laws. Revenue laws are not intended to be liberally construed, and exemptions are not given retroactive application, considering that taxes are the lifeblood of the government. In the case of CIR versus Acosta. Exceptions. Instances of retroactive application. CIR versus Philinvest Development Corporation. Number 1, where the taxpayer deliberately misstates or omits material facts from his return or any document required of him by the BIR. Number 2, where the facts subsequently gathered by the BIR are materially different from the facts on which the ruling is based. Or number 3, the taxpayer acted in bad faith. Mandatory and directory provisions. We have go towards to mandatory provisions. As a general rule, tax laws must provide for mandatory provisions because tax is the lifeblood of the state. Mandatory provisions are intended for the security of the citizens, of which they are designed to ensure equality or certainty as to the nature and amount of each person's tax. Example of mandatory provisions, we have number 1, deadlines. For example, the filing of corporate annual income tax return must be filed within the 15th day of the 4th month following the end of the taxable year. Failure to do so would result to penalty and surcharges. Prescriptive period. The law sets a 3-year prescriptive period within which the BIR can go over tax returns and determine whether there is a deficiency or not. If there is a finding of deficiency, it should be conveyed to the taxpayer within the 3-year prescriptive period. If the conveyance of the notification came after the 3rd year, then prescription is set in. The taxpayer can then invoke as a defense the prescription. Letter C. Provisions for levy of properties. The process of publication, notice to taxpayer, and other requirements must be followed before the property can be taken, sold in public auction to satisfy tax delinquency. Appeal. The provisions of appeal must be strictly followed, otherwise it may not be taken cognizance. Appeal is a privilege and not a right. Assessments and decisions, they must contain the laws or the facts, the law of jurisprudence or legal basis on which the assessment is based, otherwise the assessment is void. Protest. A taxpayer has to observe the procedure to be able to file protest. Waiver. The 3-year prescriptive period may be waived by the taxpayer. Number 1, if it is in writing. Number 2, signed by him and by the commissioner or authorized representative. Number 3, it must be for a definite period. And number 4, for a specific tax period. So, we have here taxes. Stages of taxation. We have here levy, assessment and collection, payment, and refund. Levy is also known as imposition of tax. This stage involves the determination of by the Congress of the subject and object of taxation as well as the rate. Now, assessment and collection refers to the determination of the amount of tax to be paid, while collection prescribes the means, process, and the method of implementing the tax law for the purpose of satisfying the tax obligation. It is the actual effort in obtaining payment of the tax. Now, in the case of Chavez versus Ompin, the basis of collection and fiscal adequacy. Certainly, to continue collecting real property taxes based on valuations arrived in several years ago in disregard of the increases in the value of real properties that have occurred since then is not in consonance with a sound tax system. Fiscal adequacy, which was one of the characteristics of a sound tax system, requires that sources of revenues must be adequate to meet government expenditures and variations. Payment. Payment by the taxpayer of the tax is the compliance with the tax laws, including whatever remedies that are available to him under the law. Refund. Refund is the process for the return of the taxpayer of previous erroneous, excessive, or illegal collection of taxes. Now, let's go to the definition, nature, and characteristics of taxation. Tax defined. A tax is an enforced contribution generally payable in money, proportionate in character, levied on persons, property, or the exercise of a right or privilege by the state having jurisdiction through its legislature for public purposes and paid at regular periods of intervals. The nature of taxes, they are impositions inherent in the state. Their imposition may be made only by the legislative department. This is as a rule and subject to inherent and constitutional limitations. Now, what are the characteristics of or elements of a tax? It is a forced charge, imposition, or contribution. It is in no way dependent upon the will or contractual assent expressed or implied of the conversation taxed. Number 2, generally payable in money. It is a pecuniary burden, although the law may provide for payment in kind. It is proportionate in character. Number 4, levied on persons, property, or exercise of a right to privilege. Number 5, levied by the state having jurisdiction. Number 6, levied by the legislature. Number 7, levied by and collected for public purposes. And number 8, paid at regular intervals. Now, what are the requisites of a valid tax? Number 1, it should be for public purpose. Number 2, the role of taxation must be uniform. Number 3, that either the person or property taxed within the jurisdiction of the taxing authority. Number 4, that the assessment and collection of certain kinds of taxes guarantees against injustice to individuals, especially by way of notice and opportunity for hearing be provided. And number 5, the tax must not infringe on the inherent and constitutional limitations on the power of taxation. Now let's go to the kinds of taxes. As to object, we have here personal capitation or poll tax. This refers to the tax imposed uniformly on all residents, whether citizen or not, like a community tax. Number 2, we have also property tax. This is a tax imposed on a property. Number 3, privilege or excise tax. This is a tax imposed upon the performance of an act, the enjoyment of a privilege, or the engaging in an occupation like income tax, estate tax, sales tax, etc. Excise tax are imposed on the production, sale, or consumption of specific goods, as cleared in the case of CIR versus San Miguel. Now, as to burden of incidence, direct tax, these are taxes that are extracted from the very person who it is intended or desired should pay them. They are imposition for which a taxpayer is directly liable on the transaction or business he is engaged in. Example, income tax, estate tax, and donor's tax. Indirect tax, these are taxes wherein the liability for the payment of the tax falls on or person, but the burden thereof can be shifted to another person. They're about the same demanded on the first instance from or are paid by the one person in the expectation and intention that he can shift the burden on someone else, not as a tax but as a part of the purchase price. Now, let's go to the tax rates. We have also the specific tax. It is based on a certain measure such as weight, volume, capacity, or any other physical unit of measurement. We have also ad valorem tax. Those taxes imposed based on a specific proportion of the value fixed by law or as a price such as the selling price or other specified value like sugar and cigarettes. And lastly, mixed taste or compound taxes are those which impose both specific and ad valorem. As to purposes, general or fiscal, also known as revenue purpose, these are the taxes imposed for the purpose of raising public funds for the service of the government. Then we have special, regulatory, or sumptuary taxes imposed primarily for the regulation of useful or non-useful occupation or enterprises to promote the general welfare in the protection of health, safety, and of morals, and secondarily liable only for the purpose of raising revenue. As to scope or authority, national internal revenue taxes levied by the Congress that find application all throughout the Philippines. Local real property tax and municipal taxes. Taxes that are levied by local government units that are applied and enforced only within the territorial jurisdiction or boundaries of the imposing local government unit. As to graduation, we have one progressive or graduated taxes are those that increase as the income of the taxpayer increases. Regressive are those that decrease as the income of the taxpayer increases. And proportionate are those which increase or decrease in relation to the tax bracket. Now, let's go to tax pyramiding. This is very common especially when you are trying to file for a year-end. Yung mga taxes natin na binabayar natin at the end of the year. So, tax pyramiding, it is the practice of imposing a tax upon another tax. It is a situation where some or all of the stages of distribution of goods or services are taxed, with the accumulation borne by the first consumer there is tax pyramiding when sales that are applied on both applied on uh, both inputs and outputs, thus shifting the tax burden to the ultimate consumer. It has no basis in law. It has been rejected since 1922 by the Supreme Court, the legislature, and tax authorities. It is prohibited that a taxpayer cannot be compelled to pay a tax on the tax itself. In the case of People versus Sandigan Bayan, a tax should not be imposed upon another tax. In this case, the Supreme Court agrees that the inclusion of the ad valorem tax in the tax base would yield a circuitous manner or of computation that will never in just one ad valorem tax property chargeable against a taxpayer. The tax pyramiding has since 1922 rejected by this court. The legislature and or tax only authorities, the intent behind the law is clearly to abuse a tax imposed upon another. Therefore, it appreciates or appropriate the deduct the ad valorem tax from the tax base upon which it is composed. So there you have it, folks. So I hope that you are in good state of mind right now, in the pink of health, and if you are a second year student, may you continue to pursue your dream, follow your dreams. I know that it may be hard, it may be worthy of stopping because it's discouraging, but always remember, when you quit, you will never become a lawyer. That's why never ever quit. Thank you for subscribing and watching on this channel. See you again on the next episode of our taxation series.